Welcome, everyone. I just wanted to take a second to remind you that this is the College of Letters and Science Community Lecture Series, and this is the fourth in our series of lectures that we have that highlight our faculty's research and sometimes their teaching. And you can sometimes judge the kind of teacher they are by the effect that their lecture has on you and how excited you get at the end of the lecture and asking questions. So one of the things that I would like to do is encourage you to ask our illustrious speaker, Shanny, Luft, questions at the end, and we will entertain those questions. My name is Chris Sermo. I'm the Dean of the College of Letters and Science, and I want to just give you a reminder first for our next lecture, which will be on February 11th, and quite a different topic actually, ultra-sensitive magnetic microscopy of individual nanomagnets. So we're going to be moving over to the science side from the humanities, a little bit of a change, but we're really pleased to have Shanny with us tonight. Tonight's speaker, Shanny Luft, joined us, gosh, how long ago was it? 5 years?
5 years.
Yeah, 5 years ago. He's an assistant professor of religious studies in the Department of Philosophy. He received his master's in religion and culture from Boston University and his PhD in religion in America from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He recently published an article on religion and video games, which led to explaining to his wife the following, and I quote, "What looks like playing the Xbox instead of vacuuming is actually research." It doesn't help that his son sits next to him and shouts, "Awesome move, Dad." Shanny tells us that he's fascinated by the invention of Santa Claus, and what accounts for his enduring popularity, that's the kind of question that he'll answer tonight for us. His talk explores how religious tradition gets invented in the 19th century. It's a story that weaves together writers, artists, religion, and commercial interests. He wants to make it clear to parents that this topic involves spoiler alerts, so it may not be appropriate for the whole family. And I think we're pretty safe, except maybe myself. I may step out of time.
I'll cue you when it's
yes,
time.
please clue me. Do that. So really, I think what Shanny's going to talk a little bit about here, on this appropriately frosty evening, how did the Catholic figure, St. Nicholas, transform into a holiday icon, sporting a red suit with flying reindeer? I mean, when you think about that, that is quite a leap. A couple of things off of Shanny's resume I just wanted to mention. He's taught courses in world language, world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, religion and monsters, one of the ones I wished I had gone to, history of Christmas, religion and popular culture, global Christianity, introduction to Judaism, religion in America, new religious movements, introduction to the study of religion, Hebrew Bible, New Testament, and religious autobiographies, among others. And he's done a variety of first-year seminars as well. I also wanted to mention that, just off the record, I've had the pleasure of getting to know Shanny through my Dean's Faculty Advisory Council, where he always had sage advice, and that's where I have representatives of my departments who come in and tell me what I'm not quite doing right. Shanny was never inhibited in his suggestions. In October, I want to make particular note, Shanny was elected to give the University Evening Lecture, and that is truly a competitive award that he got, and he gave a spectacular lecture on In the Devil's Church, the Christian fight over Hollywood. And I'll never forget it because we had the popcorn and the candy. And it was really a cool time. Anyway, tonight's presentation is entitled From St. Nick to Santa Claus, A Christmas History. And it was developed out of a first-year seminar that you did and has taught called The Invention of Christmas. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shanny Luft of the Department of Philosophy.
Thank you all so much for being here. As the Dean said, this lecture I'm going to give tonight is sort of a shrunken down version of this first year seminar I teach, in which we talk about aspects of Christmas for the entire semester. So I'm really excited to present my research and some of my thoughts about this. And I'm even more excited to take your questions and talk to you about the topic after I'm done. As I said, I could talk about this for 15 weeks. So I'll try to work this down to just 45 minutes or so, and then I'm excited to entertain all kinds of questions. So when I mention Santa Claus, the name, basically everybody imagines, or most people imagine, the same things, right? The red suit, the white trim, the dark belt and boots, the kind of reddish, warm face, the corpulent physique. But that's not all, right? There's all kinds of things we know about Santa. We know where Santa lives. We know what he does. We know where he does it. We know who helps him do it. And he knows stuff about us, right? He knows if we're naughty or nice. He delivers gifts that reflect his judgments of our character. And the Santa figure is so specific and so widespread that it's surprising, at least it was for me, to realize how recent so much of this history is. For example, here's an 1841 woodcut of St. Nicholas. So some of the details look a little bit like Santa Claus, right? He's climbing down a chimney. He's certainly got the presents. He's got a reindeer. The body, the facial, the look, it's not exactly quite right. He's a little bit too fit, I think, for Santa Claus. Here's one 40 years later. This was 1880 in Punch magazine in England. That's supposed to be Santa Claus. The name of the illustration was Here We Go Again. That's even more recent than the last one. This is 1841. This one's 1880. And he's got the right body type, but he looks like a homeless man. That's not how Santa's supposed to dress. He's got the right beard, maybe, but that's about it. I don't know if I didn't tell you a Santa, I'm not sure that's what would immediately come to mind. Here's another one from a Victorian Christmas card. This Santa's got the right beard. He's pushing presents, so we can check that off the list. But he's wearing a blue outfit. I don't know what that's about. Maybe Santa can wear a blue outfit on his day off. But when he's working, delivering presents, there's only one color that we expect him to be wearing. So one of the things I'm really interested in is how we go from these 19th century versions of Santa Claus, which vary in details. There's different clothing, there's different heights, there's different styles of dress, to a stock character that is so specific and unwavering in so many of his traits. And even more puzzling to me, what does any of that have to do with St. Nicholas? Right, so I'm going to start by talking about him a little bit. So Nicholas was a 4th century bishop in Myra, which is in present-day Turkey. He's considered a saint in the Catholic tradition and in the Orthodox tradition. There's many legends that have grown up about St. Nicholas, and it's really unclear what we know historically definitively about this character, about this person. It was said that he attended the First Council of Nicaea. The First Council is where Christian bishops worked out the text of the Nicene Creed. It was said that he was there. There's a lot of traditions about him being there, but there's also contradictory evidence. There's actually roll calls about the bishops that were at the First Council, and he's not on the list. So there's some sense, some people believe he was there. There's contradictory evidence. There's also a lot of stories, a lot of myths, a lot of tales that have been told about this character. And so I want to talk about one of them now related to this picture. And this is, I think, will introduce and get us into a little bit more about Santa Claus. So St. Nicholas became most popular in the Middle Ages. Around between the 10th and 12th century, that's when you see much more attention in Europe to his feast day. There are much more stories told about him, and one of which is reflected in this painting. There was a story about a poor father who had 3 daughters, and he had no money, which means he couldn't afford a dowry. Right? He needed a dowry in order to pay 3 men to marry his 3 daughters. Without any dowry at all, his daughters were either going to end up in slavery or in prostitution. And so the old man was worried about this. And then magically he discovered over the course of 3 successive nights, either bags of gold or large pieces of gold were tossed into his house. And these were mysteriously, it was discovered that these were brought by St. Nicholas. And so that story, in some obvious ways, relates to the Santa Claus myth, but there's also some things about it that I think are peculiar, which I'll come back to in a second. St. Nicholas died on December 6th, and so for Catholics and a lot of Orthodox Christians, that's considered his feast day. And it was in the Middle Ages then, about around the 12th century, when historians first find references to Christians giving gifts to other people, particularly poor people especially, not necessarily to children, but giving money or clothing or something to support poor people in the name of St. Nicholas. That happens only in the 12th century. St. Nicholas, though, besides this kind of gift-giving behavior, also, of course, lends Santa Claus his name. Sinterklaas is the German name for St. Nicholas. And then as that's translated into various versions of English, it's sometimes rendered as Sinterklaas in the 19th century, as Saint Claus, as Saint Claus, as Saint Claus, and then eventually that morphs into Santa Claus, which of course is how we get Santa's name. So the saint gives Santa his name, but he's not the only one that gives Santa a name. There's this other character who becomes popular around the 15th century. This character's name is Christkindl, in German, the Christ child. Protestants, for maybe obvious reasons, were not quite as enthusiastic about the popularity of the story of a Catholic saint who was delivering gifts to children and families, and so there are a couple of suggestions that Martin Luther and some early Lutheran leaders encouraged instead this other myth, this myth of the Christ child who would come to people's house not on the eve of St. Nicholas's feast day, December 5th, right, the night before the feast day, but on the eve of Christmas, right, on December 24th. The Christ child would come. Sometimes he would be carrying a donkey, sometimes he would be riding a donkey. There are some stories in the 18th and 19th century about children leaving some food for the donkey, and the Christ child would leave sometimes fruit or sometimes nuts or something for children. And this story became more popular among Protestants, particularly in the 18th and 19th century, although it seemed to have died out after the 19th century. It's the story of Christkindl is not one that seems to survive in the 20th century, but like this St. Nicholas, this character also gives Santa Claus a name, right? Christkindl eventually morphs into Kris Kringle, which becomes another name or another word, a kind of synonym for Santa Claus. In fact, the more I read about Santa Claus, the more I talked about him with my students, the more I began to sort of understand why Santa Claus is often drawn as kind of a giant fat guy, because as I began to learn about all the other myths and folk stories and characters and religious ideas that were sort of built around this time of year, it struck me that Santa Claus was kind of a red and white version of a black hole who would just kind of absorb all of these different kinds of folk stories. So he sort of absorbs the name of St. Nicholas, he absorbs the name of Christkindl, and he also absorbs this character, Father Christmas. Father Christmas is an English folk character, dates back to the Middle Ages. Father Christmas, it was considered the personification of this time of year. He often wore green. In fact, not red or white. He often had a holly wreath on his head. And this character was derived from pagan figures, the Roman god Saturn and Father Time. In fact, this drawing here is from Charles Dickens' first edition of A Christmas Carol in the mid-19th century. That drawing is the Ghost of Christmas Present, right? And that the illustrator based that character, and Dickens had in mind this character prior to Santa Claus, this notion of Father Christmas. Father Christmas did not bring presents to children. He mainly interacted with adults, but he represented this kind of spirit of abundance. It's often why he's often drawn as kind of a big guy, and he's warm and he's joyful. He's sometimes either portrayed as an elderly, wizened man with a long beard, or sometimes this big overweight figure, and then eventually he's merged into Santa Claus, or as I put it before, Santa Claus sort of absorbs him, and again, Father Christmas becomes yet another synonym for Santa Claus's name. But I want to return now to St. Nicholas for a second, because unlike the version of Santa Claus that is most often told to children, one of the things that has fascinated me and my students is that the medieval stories of St. Nicholas arriving in children's houses to deliver gifts had an additional character. St. Nick did not come alone. And depending on what part of what European country or what community we're talking about, St. Nicholas arrived with all kinds of different figures. Sometimes they'd be called Belsnickel, Knecht Ruprecht, Black Pete, Krampus, Schmalzli, and a whole bunch of other figures. And these sort of darker characters would be sort of the opposite of St. Nicholas. They would play kind of a good cop, bad cop kind of role often. I'll give you a couple of examples. So this is a picture, this is a contemporary picture of Schmalzli. This picture was taken just a couple of years ago in Paris. There's St. Nicholas, and you can see he's dressed in a bishop's appropriate regalia, and he's got these kind of dark figures surrounding him. Schmalzli is from the German word for dirt, so that's how the character gets his name. Another example is this character Krampus, who in Germany would clearly a demonic kind of character, who would also arrive sometimes with St. Nicholas. And there's lots of postcards and stories about Krampus sort of either torturing or teasing children, especially either encouraging bad behavior or encouraging children to be a little more conscious of their actions a little bit. There's a modern Krampus mask from Austria. There are festivals where people dress up in these terrifying costumes and have various parades. This is one of the things I was most fascinated by. This is an illustration from late 19th century of Krampus and St. Nicholas visiting a Viennese home. And I want to blow it up a little bit so you can see what's happening here. So there is our good bishop in the background. Notice he kind of leans back. And there's 4 children in this picture. This one here, who looks like he's about to soil his pants. This girl here who's running into his mother's arms. This baby here who can't bear to look. And then there's this kid here who's so terrified he won't even come out from behind the furniture. And then there's the kind of demonic Krampus character. He's often portrayed with this long tongue and horns. He often carried a broom or a stick with him, and parents would tell children that Krampus or Schmalzli, a lot of these guys carry sticks, they could beat the child if the child wasn't good. Sometimes parents would let children know the next morning. The children would wake up and there'd be a stick found in the house, and the parents would say, "Krampus must have left that for us in case you misbehave." But what I find interesting about this is the parents' look, right? The children are clearly terrified of this guy. But the dad, smoking a pipe, seems kind of amused, right? And so that tells you something about who these characters were for and sort of what they were designed to do, right? This is a way for parents to encourage good behavior and to kind of tease children in a way. And so there are all kinds of, I wish I could show you more pictures of Krampus and sort of harassing little children. There are an enormous number of them. But I want to move on to another character, Belsnickel. He often sometimes went by Knecht Ruprecht, or sometimes that was another name. You can see he's got his little whip that he carried around. And he has a sack here. What I found interesting about some of these characters, particularly Belsnickel, incidentally, Belsnickel's name comes from Pelsnickel. The Pel is fur. In German. So essentially, his name means the fur of Nicholas, right? So it's like St. Nicholas's, like an aspect of St. Nicholas. He was often dressed with kind of dark features. Sometimes people